Caitlin Fielder. It's a pleasure to have you on the Singletrack podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I do want to talk a bit about your background before we get into discussion about OCC. From what I gather, you're based in Andorra nowadays by way of New Zealand. And I'm curious, and perhaps our American audience might be too, if they're not as familiar with that area of Europe. What makes Andorra a great place to train, and what role has it played in leveling up your career as a trail runner?
Yeah, so Andorra is a pretty it's an incredibly small country. It's in between Spain and France in the Pyrenees there, and it's I'd say about 35 kilometers from the bottom to the top of the country. So it's incredibly small, but at the same time, the countryside that you get there is absolutely amazing. But it's a real juxtaposition of a country because a lot of the stuff there is like duty free. And so a lot of people come for the amazing outdoors, and then other people come to get cheap cigarettes and alcohol. So it's quite an interesting place. But where we live at 2,000 meters. So my partner, who's a cyclist, and I live there. And I step straight out and I'm straight into the mountains, really. So you basically won't get an easy run below 500 meters of elevation. So that's always been my weak point in terms of trail running, like climbing, and it's the perfect place to work on that.
You mentioned that your partner George is a pro cyclist, which is cool, and I want to ask you more about that in a moment. But did you move there specifically for your own training, or was this prompted by George's career, and it just sort of worked out as it can for trail running?
Yeah, so I moved over to Europe about 7 or 8 years ago to kind of be with George, and I only started running really properly, I'd say, in 2021. So it was definitely all based off of George's kind of career and getting altitude training while we could. And he's a climber as well, so Andorra works out really well for him. But no, it was definitely more based off of George's career. And then as time has passed with me living in Europe, I've kind of progressed a lot in terms of my running as well. And so now it helps me out too.
Thanks to Features Socks for supporting our UTMB coverage. This is my go-to sock for trail running. It's comfortable, it's durable, it's fashionable. If you're curious, if you want to try a pair yourself, head over to their website. You can use code SingleTrack20 at checkout for 20% off your next order. This episode is also sponsored by Oladance. Oladance has been my go-to choice for headphones the last 10 months. I've used these in training. I've used them in racing. There's a couple things that I love especially. First, I've gotten 16 hours of battery life in these headphones on a single charge. They have superior sound quality. Their open ear design means you don't get that achy feeling after long periods of usage, and you still get to hear your surroundings too to some extent for safety purposes. These look great. They fit great. If you're curious, if you want to try a pair, head over to oladance.com/ST. And if you use the code ST at checkout, you'll get $30 off a pair of these OSW2 headphones. They're awesome. I've used them in just about every training environment possible. I recommend them. Go check them out. Well, and you mentioned George earlier, and I'm always fascinated by relationships where both people are serious endurance athletes. You're obviously in one of those scenarios, and George is an accomplished professional cyclist. Obviously, you're competing in different sports, but I'm curious, has he had any influence on your rise as a professional trail runner? So like you could talk about any interesting learnings or wisdom from his experiences that you've tried to apply to your own career.
Yeah, for sure. He's definitely had a massive influence on myself as, like, I'd say, an endurance athlete. It's probably good that he's not coaching me because cycling and running are very different sports. And so if it was up to him, I'd be running like 200K weeks and probably just really emptying myself into it. But he likes comparing cycling and trail running is, it's just so different, the sports and the approach to each of them. Both in terms of like the science involved in cycling at that level is just, right up there in terms of how they approach it and how the teams, they're really pushing for that 1% type thing.
Yeah.
And it's a lot to do with the money involved in both sports as well. And so George's influence on how I kind of approach my training and the little things that I can do to help improve my running, a massive, like nutrition and all of this as well. So I kind of get advice from him and how to approach that, and I can definitely tell that helps me a lot with my progression in running.
One more question before we focus on OCC. In prepping for this chat here, I saw you had a bike accident in 2019 that led to a fairly major hip surgery, and there was about a year of recovery involved. And I guess to some extent, fortunately, it all took place at the beginning of COVID. So you had a pretty good window there to sit back and really take that seriously. But I find it fascinating because, when it happened, you were in the midst of your rise in the sport, and it kind of brought you back to square one. You've obviously proven in the last 2 years that the upward trajectory in your career would only continue. But I'm curious, was this something that you were able to fully recover from, or is it the type of injury that no matter who you are, it sort of takes something out of you and forces you even in post-recovery to compete at like a notch or two below your former self's potential?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, I think, because I mean, I don't really think I'm at the top of my game, and I don't necessarily think I had like something. I wasn't at the top of my game before the accident either. So it's quite hard to know, how far I could have gone had I not had the accident. But the accident definitely aggravated an issue that I already had with my hips. So basically, a lot of people have impingements in their hips, and that's what I had. And so when I crashed, it was like the bone position changed, and it really started causing havoc with my hips. I still have issues with it now, and so it's definitely not something that's completely solved, but it's a whole lot better post the surgery and everything, which has helped. But I mean, for sure, probably I'll have arthritis or something further down the track. Maybe I'd have it anyway. But yeah, it's a difficult question to try to guess where I would have been had I not had that. But it definitely made me more motivated to come back and see how good I could be, I guess.
Very cool. Has there been anything you've had to modify in the way you approach training in the long term or racing in the long term? Or do you feel like, once you got through sort of that year's worth of recovery and rehab and stuff like that, that you could sort of bounce back to how you were thinking about being a pro athlete, in 2018, 2019, stuff like that?
To be honest, in 2018-19, I never thought I would be a pro athlete. Like, it's really just been in the last few years, I think, where it's become kind of possible, but it was never actually like, of course you're like maybe one day, but it was never really on the horizon for me. So it's kind of quite crazy that I tend to like stumble into it, I guess. But yeah, I think in terms of a different approach to my training, I definitely have a lot of emphasis on like strength and conditioning and this type of thing. And so I do that 3 or 4 times a week, and I can tell a lot that helps with my kind of hips, and that's like the one major issue that I have, and it's made it not so major, which is really good, and it's also made me stronger in terms of being able to race more and kind of have a healthier body with all of that as well.
Thanks to Kodiak Cakes for sponsoring this UTMB coverage. I have used and loved their pancake mix for years now. It's been part of my post-long run breakfast tradition. If you're curious, if you want to check out their products yourself, head over to their website. You can use the code Singletrack15 at checkout for 15% off your next order. Also, thanks to Morton for supporting this coverage. I recently used Morton's hydrogels during my run of the 100-mile wilderness in Maine. It's excellent. Here, for example, is their 320 drink mix. You can also get it in the caffeinated form. They've got the 100-calorie caffeinated gels. New product being their bicarb. We just talked about this with Tom Evans on the show. Maybe you're listening to that episode right now. But if you're curious, head over to their website, morton.com. That's MAURTEN.com. I love and trust these products. A couple other things I love with the gels. They go down easy. No palate fatigue. I cannot say the same thing about other gels. And they're made with natural ingredients, no artificial colorings, no preservatives. So if you care about your overall health, if you care about what you're putting into your body, this is a great gel option. Moving more towards OCC, based on your results over the past years, it looks like your sweet spot, as some might call it, or where it looks like you're the most comfortable, is in that 40 to 50K distance range on trails. And so, you podiumed at Zagama earlier this year, for example, and you were sixth at OCC in 2019. I think you ran about 23 minutes faster and got on the podium in 21. Is it a fair characterization to say that you specialize around that marathon distance? Like, how do you think about your strengths and weaknesses and where you're interested in competing as a pro in this sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure that's definitely the distances that I've more focused on as of late. And that's because a lot of my training and distances have been targeting that kind of like sweet spot, like you say, marathon to 50 to 60K mark. It doesn't mean that if I kind of changed objectives, I would also change my training. So maybe that means going further in the future. But I think I'm not really tending towards thinking about running longer at the moment. It does involve quite a bit more, and I know it's almost like a fashion to go longer. I tried CCC last year, and my training was just more geared towards kind of the marathon, and I was doing Golden Trail Series last year as well, and I was like, it'll work, but it's a different ball game, the 100K race. So that's why I kind of stepped it back down this year and was more realistic with what I could do in terms of racing and what would actually work out. And that's why I kind of stepped it back down to OCC again this year.
I think it's super cool though. And it reminds me, do you see yourself, from a career standpoint, do you see yourself following like a Ruth Croft type playbook where for as long as possible, you really emphasize and focus on sort of that trail marathon 50K distance, the Golden Trail Series, and then maybe when the time is right, you make that leap to more like full-time 100K, 100-mile stuff? Or do you feel like you're always going to want to just exist in that sort of sub-ultra, borderline ultra space?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's quite a hard thing to guess, like into the future, I think, what I will be most satisfied with. But I feel like for me, the satisfaction comes from really feeling like you've just nailed a race. And that's when I feel like with Zagama at the finish of it, I felt like I was quite confident going into it. And then it was super satisfying also seeing that in terms of results. And for me, I feel like that's why I came back down to OCC as well. And whether I will be truly satisfied with certain results or races, that's kind of hard to say. But I think you need to really look at yourself when you're racing longer and see whether the motivation is coming from within yourself or whether it's more kind of based off of pressure to go further and farther. And that's where people kind of tend to say ultras are. But for me, I mean, I think OCC is an ultra, and I think that every single race is a different ball game. So Ruth is just, I really respect how she races and how she targets specific stuff. But whether I will be, I mean, I heard from Ruth after Western States, and I wouldn't say I was motivated to step on that start line after hearing the pain. But I mean, it's satisfying for sure, and maybe I'll take it on later.
Right on. Well, one more question about OCC. You've obviously had a lot of experience at this race. You're a veteran of the race at this point. You've had a lot of success there. There's just been this upward progression each time you've stepped on the start line. And I'm fascinated because it seems like year over year, there's a step function of growth and competition in each of these UTMB World Series races. Is that something that you've noticed on the ground as an athlete competing? Like, have you had to give more of yourself each year and really reevaluate what it takes to be successful? Like, talk about what you've noticed having to level up your game as a multi-time finisher there.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can see it at UTMB races, but I think it's honestly in like every single race that we do now. It's like, and I mean, I haven't been, around that long. I'm a veteran in terms of age, but in terms of the sport, I still feel like an amateur sometimes. So, like, I mean, I think of the Golden Trail races now, and they're massively stepping it up in terms of competition, and UTMB as well. So I think this year is incredibly competitive in terms of OCC for the women. And sometimes I think the women's field is almost more close and more competitive than the men's, which is amazing in the sport. And I think that just shows that women are more comfortable with stepping up as well and really putting themselves on the line, which is really cool. And we saw it at Worlds as well. Like Worlds was one of the most intensely competitive races that I've done. I've never been so surrounded by women so close in abilities and in terms of the competition. So yeah, it's really cool to see, but it's also like you need to be able to pull off your A game, or else you're behind the ball, you know. So it's quite intense as well.
Thanks to Brooks for sponsoring this UTMB coverage. I have been using their High Point collection, particularly the waterproof jacket and pants for hiking adventures, as well as their new and improved Cascadia 17, which is my favorite Cascadia since version 8, which I used for a thru hike way back in 2014 of the Appalachian Trail. So if you want to check out all this gear, head over to brooksrunning.com/singletrack for more information. A lot of our guests on this show are from the ultra scene, so you just see a less frequent racing schedule. They might prioritize 2 or 3 races a year. One of the things that I love about your scene is, you can, by the time August rolls around, you could have been on 8 to 10 start lines and still feeling great, or even peaking for OCC. I know you've done Zagama earlier this year, a lot of other stuff on the World Series circuit. You were at Worlds in Innsbruck. How are you feeling heading into OCC, especially compared to just the other years you've towed the line here? Do you feel like sort of things are coming together and you're hitting your fitness at the right time? Are you tired? Like, just talk about that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite hard to try to remember how you felt, I guess, in previous years coming into races like this. But yeah, at the start of the year, well, kind of leading up to this point, I have raced quite a lot. And that was probably too much for me. Like, I thought I would be able to kind of target races, but the problem is having races only 2 or 3 weeks apart, and especially marathons, you still need, a bit of time to recover, and then you don't really have as much time to train because you're kind of ready for the next race. So I noticed that quite a lot a few months ago, that my actual fitness was on a bit of a decline, which isn't always where you want it to be, I guess. And so I've spent the last few months just really building back up my fitness, and we did a Salomon training camp running the UTMB track, the Mont Blanc track, and that was really good, just to have a really good build with that week too, and really good people around. So I feel like my fitness is definitely where I want it to be, and I've had some good sessions, and where that puts me in terms of the women's field, I guess we'll see in a week and a half or so. But yeah, I feel confident, so we'll see.
Okay, last thing I have to ask about this. We can even link to it in the show notes if you want, but I understand that you have a side gig. It could even have evolved into a main gig at this point, painting shoes for runners and cyclists. Talk about this more. Like, what exactly is the service? Talk about the inquiries you're receiving, what the process looks like. I find this, as someone who's a gear nerd, I find this fascinating.
Yeah, this is super random. So this was actually this is my it's my job as well as running. So when I first moved over to Europe, I was working in science. So I worked in aquaculture, like marine biology, and the transfer of those skills to a job over here isn't as easy as you would think. No, it wasn't easy at all, and so I decided to come up with my own business. And I started painting. Well, I painted a pair of shoes for my partner George to wear at the Tour de France, and he wore them. This is like 6 years ago, and
Okay.
and I just got random inquiries from people asking if I could paint their shoes as well. And then the business kind of took off, and because I know a lot of the other people in the pro peloton, I can kind of paint shoes and slap them on them as well, and they'll be riding the Tour de France with my artwork on it, which is amazing marketing. And so people will write to me and ask about a design, and I'll do a Photoshop mock-up for them to show them basically exactly what it will look like. And then they'll buy the shoes usually from a site and get them sent directly to me. Then I paint the shoes and I send them back to them. So I've got around a 4-month wait on shoes at the moment. But it's pretty cool because I can take the shoes with me. I was painting some at Worlds, and I usually paint before races, and so it's a bit of a distraction, and also kind of, I mean, running is not like the be all end all for me. It's amazing to see where I can go, but I think it's quite good to have something else on the sidelines as well.
Super cool. How many can you do at one time? Like at what point do you say, I have too much here. I need to focus on, the painting piece. Like, what's your capacity with this?
Yeah, I mean, it's just me. It's just me painting them. So it depends on how intense the design is, and how much you can kind of put through. As my running has become more competitive, the working has taken a bit of a backseat in terms of the artwork and the painting, which I'm fine with. But a lot of people are also, they're fine with the weight as well, which comes with more demand. And usually a pair of shoes, if it's super detailed, will take maybe a week, and that's like hand painting. But it's all like, it all lasts on the shoes. It's special leather paint. You prepare the shoes properly so that the paint stays on. So I've had my shoes painted for 6 years, and they're still, lasting really well.
Super cool. Well, yeah, we'll make sure to link to it in the show notes along with the rest of your social media. Caitlin, it's been a pleasure to get to know you. We wish you the best of luck at OCC. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with? Any final thoughts? Anything we didn't cover that we should before we go?
I think it's really cool to talk to you and talk through how competitive and how great the race will be, and it's just really cool to have everybody's support, especially with the rising women's field and everything like this. I think it's really cool to have people backing you on the sidelines and backing the sport in general. So I appreciate it.